It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
And I think this week I've remembered to press all the buttons, twist all the knobs. I don't know. Last week I went to mix last week's show, and I saw I was missing your audio, and then I looked for my audio, and my audio was nowhere to be found. I even, did the fancy look in the folder where the recording software stores everything, and it's not even there. So I can't imagine. I thought we even talked about me hitting record last week, but I don't know. So I'm having to use the audio from Restream for last week's show. So it's not the best.
It's gonna be a rough one.
Not the best.
It's gonna be a rough one.
But at least Mark's not on a VPN this week.
Running smooth.
So there's that.
Running smooth on Linux. I got all of my Linux.
Did you? OSB,
OBS issues kind of worked out. Yeah, you see, I got the nice green screen going on back there. Yeah,
it looks like you're back in your New York City office, so that's good.
Yep. So I've been.
Did you just use that plugin or something to make the virtual camera?
Yeah, there was a pack. Well, I could. There was an OBS plugin that I had to install to get the virtual camera working in OBS, because I love to run everything through OBS, even all my Zoom meetings and class sessions, and so I can control the background and my desktop and everything like that. So there is, I guess on Windows it just works out of the box, but then on Linux you have to install an extra extension or plugin. And there was one you had to actually build. I tried to build it, and it did build, but it didn't actually do it. So it wasn't work. Some additional research. Everybody's made a package at some point for OBS, seems like. So I finally found the right package. I could just do my apt install, and boom, it worked. The only downside about it is that I have to
wait, this is a package for OBS or a package for the OBS plugin?
It's an OBS. It's an OBS plugin that you have to install with the apt, which is fine. I'm good.
Okay, a package install. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
But the only downside is I have to authenticate as a sudo every time every time you launch it. Every time I press the start the virtual camera, I had to authenticate, which is kind of weird, but all right. Because it needs some deep level system authentication in order to run
a virtual device or something like that.
Yeah, which I've been loving Linux. I feel like I'm back home, Tim. I'm back to my happy place.
Yeah.
Programming eyes have just been reopened. New opportunities are just falling before me, and I love it.
Wait a second. What are the new opportunities?
Just ideas, Tim. Ideas, really? Coding. I've been re-energized as a developer. I'm not only an academic, Tim. I'm a developer too. But I'm finally starting to believe that in myself because I'm on Linux.
Gotta say, the ideas feel like a two-edged sword, you know?
But the only downside of it,
so many of them, and I never get to them. But anyway, yeah.
The only downside about Linux, man, I do have to authenticate for everything. I gotta be putting in my admin password for almost everything.
Yeah.
Which that gets to be a little bit.
Things, yeah.
Which I think well, maybe you know this, and I think we talked about this previously. Is there a good kind of thumbprint reader for Linux that I could plug in with a USB that I could just kind of touch when I need to authenticate?
I used to have one built into my laptop. So one of my other System 76s had it right on the trackpad between the buttons. And it wasn't like the fingerprint reader like your phone has where you push your finger against it. It was a scanner where you kind of ran your finger across it and kind of stroked it. So it was really easy, right? It says provide your password. It's just go down, and then you didn't press a button as much as you just ran your finger over something really quick. Mm-hmm. And I actually like that. I like that a lot. You probably, I don't know now, you probably could get away with a YubiKey type of thing, where as long as it wouldn't be like a fingerprint reader as much as it would be, I just acknowledge that it's me by pressing the button and say, yep, I have the physical token here. So if you end up leaving that in the machine,
it's one of those YubiKeys that you gave out to your coworkers, but you didn't give out to me for Christmas, right?
Well, I didn't give it to my coworkers for Christmas, and I also did not give it to you. So, I mean,
was that part of the package? I can't remember. Was it when part of the? Oh, that would be the company. That was the company retreat.
It was a virtual dev meeting.
Yes.
So there wasn't a retreat. We were all in our offices. But yes, that was in the package that was sent to all of the devs on the team.
So how does
you being on the team because you have refused to submit your application
I don't want to cross the streams. I don't want to, weird things can happen. You start
It would
crossing
be,
streams
yeah,
too.
yeah, it would be weird. It would
But
be weird, that's for
the
sure.
but the YubiKey. So if I would buy the YubiKey, install
But that
it,
is the first step.
install the software, I have to I authenticate with it, and then it knows that I am
Yeah, I
me
think you
based
could
on.
use the YubiKey as your basically authentication that you're you, and then if you left it into the laptop, you just have to
Mhm.
tap it every time you wanted to authenticate that it's you. Now, then you could ask yourself, well, then how? If the prompt is to say, "Hey, are you really the admin that wants to make this choice?" If you're leaving it in your laptop,
Yeah,
I mean, then as your
kind of
lock
from
screen goes
security
in,
perspective. Yeah,
yeah, can the YubiKey unlock? Then you just have to
yeah.
remember, like, if I walk away from this, I need to take the key with me. So I don't know. I don't know. I think there's other keys that probably have a fingerprint reader on them. If you'd want to kind of treat that as a kind of just
Mhm.
give them the fingerprint to authenticate, so you don't have to type your password. Um,
Well, I definitely do appreciate the high security level that Linux gives you by enforcing you to put in an admin password for almost every single process that you have to do on the system.
I'm
Uh,
I'm puzzled though because I don't put it in that often, and like I'm not sure what you're
I
doing
don't.
exactly.
Well, like I was talking about with the OBS start of the virtual cam, I have to do that. What else? If I don't. Maybe it just feels like I'm just doing it more. I don't know because also every time I unlock the computer, which is that's fine. But
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
I don't know. It just
But
feels, or
that's not
maybe
like a sudo password. That's
or
just
maybe
a.
it's also because I've been doing a lot. Like I got it was man, I was got back my love of Docker. I finally understand Docker this week, Tim.
You
Being on
understood Docker
Linux,
this week,
it
yeah?
finally made sense to me
It finally made sense.
because I've
Okay.
actually I actually implemented on Linux and I've added it to one of my projects, made my Docker file, even did the Docker Compose to set it
Oh,
up for my
nice,
one of my Gatsby
nice.
sites, and just worked it right. Remember, I had all those issues with trying to get it to work with my Gatsby site
I kind of
on
remember
Windows.
them. I don't remember
And that
what they
horrible
were.
Docker file, the Docker configuration, you were like, looked at me like, "What are you doing right now?"
I remember that. I remember looking at the Docker file and being like, no, 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 no.
So I because every time I have to run, because do you run like when you run bring up your Docker containers, do
Hmm.
you have to like sudo because it has to be a system level process to do that, right?
No.
You don't do
No,
that?
for Docker, just to add yourself as your user to the Docker group, and then
Ooh,
then your user can launch Docker
okay.
without
I should
having
do
to
that.
sudo that.
Maybe
Yes, you should.
that's probably also my big issue is because
Because
that's
yeah, if
for
you're doing that
certain
every time you're
applications.
trying
Yeah.
to take
Okay.
Docker up or down, that'd be terrible for me because like I don't even have things like PHP installed on my system.
Hmm.
Just the other day, we were doing I need to do some things with AWS and their command line tool. I don't have their command line tool installed on my system because I don't have Python installed. Well, Python might be installed, but it's like I don't want the dependencies for all these little kind of utility things sitting around. I don't want npm installed on my system, just because of the nightmare that is to try to keep. Well, what package is up? If you're using npm as the thing to run some type of command line utility, then it's like, well, just npm and its versioning and the way that it puts dependencies in different places, and I don't want to deal with that.
It's magic, Tim.
So
It's magic. It just does
yeah,
it.
yeah. So pretty much all of those utilities you would run from the command line that are maybe relying on Python or Ruby or or Node,
Hmm.
I just install as Docker containers that I alias the command. So if I type AWS, I think the AWS CLI utility uses AWS. So if I type AWS in my command line, what it's really doing is running in the Docker container that's from Amazon. Amazon actually I say just, I don't mean it as in it was recently. Other people had built Docker
Hmm.
containers to run their command line utility. So then Amazon, I guess, was like, oh, why don't we just do that? So there's an official Docker container with on AWS's documentation. It's like this is how you get your authentication. Just mount the folder into the container. Mount the volume of your current working directory into /AWS so you can actually upload and download S3 files and things like that when you're trying to use
Hmm.
those tooling. And then they had a little handy, how about you alias AWS is this, and then it just works. It's AWS, and then whatever command you want to give it, it'll work just fine because it's launching the Docker container, mounting in the couple files it needs to authenticate, mounting in the current directory that you're in, and then executing it there. So I don't have to worry about, oh, I need to update that utility for AWS that has these dependencies. Don't even have to worry about that because it's all in the container. So from that perspective, yeah, for sure my user is in the Docker group, because I don't want to have to type sudo every time I do that. PHP is the same way. I have a Docker container that's just the latest PHP version. So
that makes sense.
PHP,
And I didn't think that to actually use Docker for, let's say, as a way for like the configuration and the command line, like a command line interface for a cloud service like AWS, or I use primarily Google
or really
Cloud.
any utility.
Yeah. So like, but using that as sort of like your base for that, so you don't have to have that configuration of the local files installed directly on your system.
Well, yeah, I have the configuration on my system, but I don't have all the dependencies or anything like that. I'm sure guessing you've used ImageMagick in the past, right? Like that is the standard image manipulation tool with a CLI interface, right? Don't install that. Install a Docker container and alias the commands, so I don't have to worry about that being on my system and being like, oh no, it's out of date. I need to make sure I have which.
So are you
do I have
spinning
installed?
up the containers before you use them, or you just automatically have them?
No, I have an alias.
Running.
So the command, if I type, like say, if I type AWS, the command is docker run -it -rm or dash. I think it's just -it -rm AWS CLI, and then it passes whatever else comes after it as the arguments. And it also does a -v to mount my personal directory in there, print working, $user, some things that, some things to make it work well that way. And you couldn't, in that context, I could never give it a relative path above me. But I'm totally okay with that limitation, right? Even PHP, the command PHP on my system is alias to run, docker run -it -rm. So IT, so I have the interactive terminal, so I can actually interact with it, right? -rm, whatever it's like the PHP image, I forget what it's called. I think it's just PHP latest, and then whatever I have passed after that, it mounts, and it also has a mount, so it's going to mount my current working directory in the processes working directory, what I've defined for the processes working directory. And then if you just want to, play around in PHP, because you can run PHP-A and just execute code, I can do that. If I want to execute a file, PHP, give it the file, it executes it. I actually have to have, there's a server component to PHP, and that I have as a different alias just because it doesn't work to just use PHP and pass it that command, because it's going to expose ports. And then you would have had to map those. So I have a separate alias for PHP-server, which just runs the local dev server, serving up whatever's in my current working directory, and then mapping the ports to my host. So, doing the port mapping.
Do you have like a repo that how many Docker, are these each individual Docker files or configurations?
No, these are just aliases. So they're not Docker files. They're aliases for existing containers. I'm just using whatever container or.
Oh, so you're just getting like any stock container you can get from.
Yeah, like the stock PHP container, the AWS container.
Okay.
If I've had to, sometimes I've had to build it, and then I put that up on my Docker hub. So I'm pulling down my container. So yeah, there may be a Docker file if I Dockerize a command. There was a HAL, since I do API stuff, there's a HAL spec, or I forget what it's called, but I think it was a linter maybe. I don't even remember. But it was a command that would make it really easy for me to work with a HAL API response. And there wasn't a Docker version for that. I think it used Ruby. So it's like zero chance I'm installing that. So I made a Docker file off of, I think I just piggybacked off of the official Ruby container, or image is what I should call it, because it's not actually a container until you're running it, right? So I used it off the official Ruby image. My Docker file was just like, install this gem, right? That's it. And then set up maybe the entry point to run it. So if the entry point is running the command, and then any commands that I pass after my alias then would be things that were passed to the entry point, then it's just like I can just run the tool like it was installed on my system. I can even pipe things to it. So I found it very useful, and I give a talk on that, obviously.
That's some next level Docker stuff, Tim.
Well, it's actually not, right? Like,
but it feels to me. Well, first of all, it kind of, just for me understanding how to use Docker, once I got to work, that was the biggest thing. Once I got off Windows, got on Linux, and it feels like it just works better. Because I don't know.
Yeah,
it feels like Linux, there's some extra. Well, maybe it was a Gatsby thing.
It's the Linux subsystem of Windows, and how the file. I don't know exactly how they work, but it's a little fuzzy.
Going back to that's when I truly understand how Docker understood how it worked. It runs on that subsystem. So it's basically, so if you're on Linux,
right,
that's the subsystem for the Docker containers, and the Docker containers are basically just preset configurations of that system, right? So it has like its own kind of internal packages configuration, but it's running on Linux.
It's
So
just it's just a
I can't
jailed
like
shell.
run like a Windows Docker container on Linux.
There's no Windows Docker container.
No, that's what I mean. You can't do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But if you're on Windows, if you're running like a Rails application or running a Python application, it's a Python Rails application on Windows, even though it's Dockerized, but it's still running on that subsystem, which is Windows.
It's running on the Linux subsystem. Yeah, I don't know how weird that gets, because it used to be, before the Linux subsystem, it used to be Docker ran in a virtual machine on Windows, and I think that's actually what it does on Mac. I think it still runs as a virtual machine, which has its own issues, because you're basically mounting whatever your file system is into the virtual machine for then the virtual machine to have a containerized process, which is what Docker is, right? But you say the reason why I'm saying like it's not next level is because it feels like that, because whenever people talk about Docker, they talk about running an application. Well, I shouldn't say whenever, but that is usually the context that's brought up, right? Yeah. How to run your local dev, how maybe to deploy with containers, what the value is for that. And then when it gets down to, oh, this is great, I saw a talk on this, and this is a great thing for me to try to do, then you're stuck with, well, how do I do it? Because what all changes do I have to make to how I look at things and how my application is structured to be able to fit into containers? If I'm running on a PHP application, right, maybe I'm running on some shared hosting or even my own virtual machine someplace, and I've probably installed Apache, or have I installed an Nginx, whatever. The truth is, PHP is not a web server. It can be. Yes, there's a development web server.
It should be running all professional web servers, the PHP development server.
Yeah, that's
They handle multiple crests so smoothly.
Yeah, you say so smoothly that actually not quite smoothly, since it doesn't. Like there's that part, but other than that, so you're usually using, maybe PHP FPM with an actual web server in front of it, which is Nginx or Apache. So if you're going to say now, how do I do that? Well, there's Docker images that have PHP and Apache installed. That may not be the best one to use, because it might be better to actually run a container that's Nginx that is then proxying to an FPM container that's sitting there running your PHP process, because that's how Docker was designed, is to run a single process, not multiple processes. If you look at those containers that are a PHP and Apache all in one container, they're doing some weird things, because there's two processes that they're running in there. So they have to do some odd things to get that to run.
Okay, that's interesting.
So then you start saying, well, okay, I gotta have an npm container. I figure out how to proxy that to PHP, and you walk away from a talk that says, oh, this is how to do your local dev or even deploy with Docker, thinking, now I've got multiple containers. Now I need to start learning about Kubernetes or whatever my orchestration concept and configuration is, and then you go like, you get back to your office on Monday morning, you're like, that was a great talk. I want to start trying to do this, and you realize there is so much I have to do just to start trying to do it. And if you know what the phrase yak shaving is, that's what it is. It's the idea that you just want to shave your yak, but you can't get to it because of all the other things you have to do.
Never heard of that before.
That's actually wrong. I think the idea is you end up shaving a yak, and somebody's like, "What do you do?" Well, I had to do this, to do this, to do that, to that, to that. It's that whole thing where it's like, well, I gave this illustration. I should find the audio.
Yak shaving should have been the show title, Tim.
It should have been now that we've gotten this far. But it's that situation. Well, this is I don't even remember, because I wrote this all down, and it was a pretty funny explanation. So I'm gonna probably flub it completely here, because I don't remember it all. But the idea is you've got a bunch of yaks and you want to shave them, right? So you go outside to shave the thing, and you've got your clippers, but where's your extension cord? And you go looking for your extension cord, and you realize that your extension cord, well, it's broken, right? So then you have to start cutting the extension cord and splicing it together. And then 3 hours later, you're at the hardware store buying paint and windshield wiper fluid, and the guy's like, what are you trying to do? And you're like, I'm just trying to shave the yak. So that's the situation you get yourself in. You get back, sit at your desk on Monday morning, and it's like, well, what are you trying to do? I'm just trying to see if we can deploy to Docker. Then why are you auditing the dependencies of a project we don't even use? Because
that's developer life, Tim.
That's why I give the talk, yak free Docker. So it's a talk that shows you how you can start using Docker without having to go through all that.
Mm.
And for me, the easiest way to understand how Docker works is just to say, now, since I'm usually talking to PHP audiences, let's take something that you're all familiar with, which is just running PHP from the command line, and let's show you how to run it from the command line in a Docker container. And the benefits of that, and the benefits for me were, want to see how this file works on PHP 5? Sure. Just change the
Mm.
container. Boom, you're running in PHP 5. Want to see
Yeah.
how it works on PHP 8 because you're not to PHP 8 yet? Just change the container. You don't have to scratch your head and say, how am I going to compile multiple versions of PHP to run on this OS? Don't even have to worry about it. You can, with one line, change whether you're interpreting your script on PHP 5, 7, 8, wherever. And then you can try different extensions. You don't have to worry about it because you haven't installed it. So I show how to do that, and I show how to do the same thing with Node because nobody wants to install npm, and show how you can start crafting like these Docker files that just wrap a utility for you, and then you have a command line utility. And then once you see, oh, I can start using Docker just in the context of my everyday life, then you have a better way of understanding, oh, I kind of now see better what you mean by running the server in a container. And I understand why launching my website might require 3 different containers and not one, because each one is its own thing. You don't want a container that runs Apache, PHP, and MySQL. That's probably not what you want to do.
Hmm.
It may be
Hmm.
what you end up doing, but it's probably not what you want to do.
Yeah.
So just giving people that approach where you can say, oh, you can start using Docker right now. You know, you just spin up a container, get in it, do some stuff, see that it had nothing to do with your system, exit it out, remove it, you're gone. Great. Run a couple commands, save it, and then be like, wouldn't it be nice if I could have documented how to save it? Oh, that's what a Docker file is. So,
Yeah. Well, that's because I came at it from the virtualization perspective, from totally using VMs my whole life, running, which I do now in Linux, which has been going great too. Which, all the Windows applications that I occasionally need, well, I'll just spin up like a virtual box and a VM, and it runs great as long as you have enough memory and to set aside for it, and a good processor. It works really, really good. So I was coming at Docker from that perspective, saying, okay, if I Dockerize my application, am I basically making a virtual space for it in a sense that has its own packages, has its own configuration, and running it from there. And like I said, you're coming out, you're trying to teach it from a different perspective of saying, okay, well, let's not even go there. Let's just break it down from just a process standpoint. So if you want to run this process or this single program,
yep,
run it through that. So
and figure out how to run it in an environment where it's not going to mess with the rest of your system.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm 100% on board, Tim. I'm a Docker file now.
Yeah, Docker file, not a Docker file.
Exactly.
I see what you did there. I see what you did there.
So another thing I was working on this week.
Okay.
I've been doing a lot with Copilot.
Should we before we go down that road?
Okay.
Should we mention that it is our 40th episode?
The big 40.
Yeah. Yeah.
Big 40. We're getting older.
We should have timed it so it was my birthday on the 40th episode, but we didn't. So this is the big, we've been doing this.
My birthday's coming up, and if it lands on a show date, I'm not talking about it.
Yeah, I know, because that's exactly what you did last year. Have we done? You know what? I should look real quick. I feel like we've been doing this whole thing for about a year. Now, right?
So I saw the dates on the files when I was last week. I was like, oh yeah, it's been almost a year now. Because I know we took a big break over the summer, but yeah.
Yep, October 8th was our first show, so we've been doing it for over a year now.
Yeah.
And I will say we're like a show and a half from a production Q&A standpoint. I've tried to release the last show on the Friday. I got behind last week, so 2 weeks ago just went up today, and I didn't have audio for last week, so I'm getting audio for last week's from Mark. I completely flubbed my audio, and it wasn't there, so it'll be less good, but that should hopefully.
See, I just look at our show today like a fine wine, Tim. It's just going to get better with age. It's going to grow more mature, more elegant, better tasting.
Okay.
So maybe once we get to the big 80, we'll be there.
Hopefully we won't both be turning 80 when we get to that. So I think we'll probably get there faster than than our ages will. But and I know where you're probably going with Copilot, but maybe we'll get there in a second.
Hmm.
One thing that's come up for me this week is just there's some tedious tasks that I have to do, and when I forget to do them, I can kind of our backlog doesn't stay as up to speed as it should, and we realize we're kind of behind, and I forgot to shuffle things in. So that automation of those,
Yeah, I was wondering that if you say they're tedious tasks, why don't you have some type of script or
that's the thing, because
automatic?
sometimes that automation is hard
Yeah.
to write or figure out, or you're like saying, well, I don't know how long we're going to be using this system, so is it worth the time to automate it? But that is, I mean, there's so much in our life that we
Mhm.
try to automate, and as developers, we try to automate a lot of things, right? Because that tedious, if it doesn't actually require me to make a decision about it, then is it really something that I want to have to do? And if I'm just basically dragging clicky, 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 clicky to do stuff. So, but getting to that automation can sometimes be difficult because you say, all right, well, there may be a system that helps me move this from one place to the other, but then I might have to write some code against an API. How am I going to run it? Am I going to run it off of my own machine with cron? How are we going to make sure this runs every day? So some of those automation things, but automation can be useful, right? It can make life a lot faster. Just sometimes it can be hard to do it right.
What do you mean, or hard? Well, when you say hard to do it right, or just hard to even attempt to do it right, because you're saying that you're kind of dragging your feet about automating these tasks because you do know the amount of work it would take to automate it.
So yeah, there's first that.
And
Yep.
you are thinking in your head, well, it would take some work for me to program this, but then in the end, I'm going to save so much time afterwards. But then what if I don't automate it right? Because it's going to the configuration is going to change anyway. So why even take the time to even automate it?
Right.
Because
Well, I put the time in
yeah,
if it's going to change
yeah,
on me. So the automation on is good, but also there's trade-offs. There's trade-offs with everything, and trying to find like, well, is it worth automating this or is it not worth automating this? In the end, is it gonna? Because if it takes me a week to automate it, it probably is not worth it. Because
mhm.
am I actually spending a week of time doing this every year? And if not, probably not worth automating it, unless the thing is the fact that when I lose sight of the thing that I need to do, I put everybody behind. Then, well, okay, so the cost of that is higher than just my time. Maybe we should automate it. Um, yeah. So those
Yeah, I
are,
totally understand that, but it's also a fact like once I get a request, like that's a common request that happens maybe like once a week, maybe a couple every other week or so, and then when you get the request, when you have that gut reaction like, oh my gosh, I have to do that again. Like, why
hmm
do I have to do that? Like, it just becomes like an annoyance over and over again. I think that's where I get driven to like saying, well, I really have to write this feature. I have to really get this in place so I can so people do not have to stop bugging me. Like I talk about the art website,
yeah.
the
Oh
art part
yeah,
website,
yeah, yeah.
which the one remaining feature, and I'm actually working on it today after we get done with the show because I need to rework how there's like an events kind of listing category or set of pages, and I need to eventually want to get to the point where faculty can have their own accounts or profiles. So if there is a new art show or some type of event that they're doing or that's on campus, they could just create the event themselves in the website, and then it would just get put in the feed instead of asking me saying, okay, there's this event coming up. Could you, this is the images for it, this is text for it. Could you make a page for it? And I'm like, all right, I have to go, make a new markdown file or do this, do that, and get it in place. And like, even though I try to make that process as easy as possible for myself, but it's still every time I get that request, I'm like, why can't they just do it themselves? So I
And
have to.
that though to me is like you're automating something in software you're already writing.
Okay, so you're talking about
And
something
that seems
that.
like a no-brainer, right? But like, well, let's use this show as an example. It's not the steps I take aren't hard. There's some that can't be automated, right? Just shifting the audio so yours and mine lines up, and then that can't be automated. I've at least gotten to the point with my audio software that I have they're basically export jobs that are configured in such a way that says one exports, runs just exports my feed and your feed as two files essentially. And
Mhm.
that's what I use to build the left and right version that we send up to the transcription service. So it'll just split it in half and say, and it's from the show. It's not like
Mhm.
your audio, my audio. It's the mixed audio together. It's just our two voices in two different channels. So exactly what goes out in the in the podcast is what we transcribe. And the timestamps are right because it's not. If I just took my file and your file and transcribed them, the timestamps wouldn't line up.
I still think that eventually, from an AI perspective, you should be able to get there.
Oh, there should be, yeah. So maybe there should be something that just says line these all up. But that process of here's the bumper music that already exists. Here's the full mix from Restream that lets me line up the bumper music, and then I just find a place where I can put your audio in, my audio in. Now the audio syncs. So it's just the clean feeds, not the feeds from the stream, because the feeds from the stream are not as high quality. You know, there's lagginess, there's distortion, whatever. They're the clean feeds from each one of our computers. It matches exactly to the show container, which has the bumper and the outro bumper, right? And then once it's all lined up, I just hit a button and it takes that data and it exports left and right track of you and me for the transcription, and then a full mix that has us just slightly to the left and the right for the podcast. And then that I throw in a folder, and now here's where it would be no brainer to automate, right? I upload it to S3, and then I call an API. I have a command line function that says, it's been uploaded to the whatever folder on S3 to episode 40 on S3. Then I hit Assembly AI and say, hey, here's the location of this transcription file. Please start transcribing it. It gives me a response with the JSON I just save in the output. I save it a file to that folder, and that has the ID of the transcription request. A little bit later, I say go fetch the transcription because it's done, and I have the transcription in that file. And then I go update the show notes and upload that. All the uploads I could automate, but I'd have to automate that with S3, right? So I could automate a command line that just says upload, and it would look at the folder and upload it to my S3 bucket, and then maybe call the transcription and maybe ping it every once in a while until it was done, something like that, But it's like, how much effort is that going to take? Versus out of that whole process, the drag and drop of a couple things isn't really that much. It's tedious, but it's not that much. Now, you're right. If this was in an application that I owned all the code for, yeah, for sure. But it's not. It's not in my domain. It's stuff that I can reason through and say, oh, I can see how that would be helpful to automate. But it's not in my domain where it's just like, oh, yep. Instead of having users upload this data that then I have to manually do, I'm just going to make them a form, put it on the application. They can just plug the data in there and hit submit, because it's not like an application I'm writing. It's automation on the system. Now, are there it's when it comes to automation on your own system, there are tools like macros and things like that can help you replace tedious keystrokes and mouse activities with different applications. But even a macro wouldn't really fit that. This would definitely be something you want to do with a command line script, which is like, okay, I can see how it would work, but is it worth all the time and frustration to take me to try to figure out how to get that working well, to have it work 75% of the time?
And this does sound like something you could probably get. You could probably Fiverr it, right? TaskRabbit.
TaskRabbit.
Because it is interesting because I back in my development days when I'd work with a lot of outsourcing companies,
right,
primarily in India, and some in when I was working independently, I had a couple in Ukraine actually, which is kind of interesting.
Oh yeah,
what's going on there right now? I'm thinking about hopefully that everybody's over that I used to work with is okay over there. But yeah, just thinking about those types of tasks. What I would do is when I would be working independently, and let's say I had my contractors that were being in Ukraine, they were more kind of design focused. So if I needed to have some artwork or some images like modified, but it was kind of a very kind of similar process. And if I didn't want to do it myself, I could just, here you go, do it. Then, it doesn't really charge me too much. I could also bill it as part of the project. So it was a way of me kind of offloading tasks that you're talking, like the way you're talking about, where like I can do it myself, but it would take some time. So can I offload that to somebody else?
Yeah, I remember when I went to visit the Odesk offices years ago, everybody there was into this. We're hiring virtual assistants to kind of take that off, like an hourly virtual assistant, and just the tedious tasks just passed to them, which I totally get. In this case, it's like, since I'm the one that has to do the lining of the audio, maybe it's a little harder unless they would be able to do that. And that would be the thing, right? turn this into something that somebody else does, and then maybe they say, "Oh, I'm gonna automate it."
And of course, our huge budget for the show would,
Oh yeah,
it's definitely the budget there to do that too.
It would totally cover it. Yeah, yeah. I think everybody can see this is quite a production going on right here. Yeah.
But I think AI will save you eventually, Tim.
Eventually,
the AI is going to, because that's what the purpose of machine learning, artificial intelligence from a development standpoint. It should offload. It should offload those tedious tasks.
Yeah, but I mean, after a while, would it just be like, you don't even need? Don't worry about doing a podcast, Tim. We've got it covered. We'll generate that podcast for you.
Yeah, there you go.
It'll sound like you and Mark, and it'll be far more interesting.
Probably. Actually, that actually makes sense. If there was an AI that could just scour our social media posts, which I'm not on Twitter, Facebook anymore, but let's say, but I have been
so infrequently
for many years. They would go back and take a look at all those posts and then create a podcast. So that would actually be a very interesting podcast.
There'd be some, there should be
the journeys that you and I have taken. I think would definitely be.
There'd be some machine learning there. Yeah. Isn't that like the whole thing? Like you train these things on stuff. Like that's the whole. The models, right? So yeah.
Well, from
Twitter model.
Well, remember, I always have my dream project, the site build, which I still
site build.io.
I haven't seen anybody implement yet, but AI is getting really good just for image generation. It's like crazy good how like you just describe what type of image that you want and then output. Now it's not perfect; it's kind of funny, but it's at the same time though you could see where it's going, and it's like whoa, it's like. Pretty soon I could just say, generate a podcast with Mark and Tim, and you could definitely recreate us based on what we post online, and the content you could definitely get from different places. Yeah. So I think you get there, and it's crazy. It's crazy how it's going. So what I want to talk about with you.
Wait, we're not there yet. I have a conspiracy theory.
Okay.
And I know you're definitely into conspiracy theories.
Oh, I'm absolutely
Yeah, there.
For a hot time. Let's go.
So I was talking with another dev on the team the other day, and it was how Gmail just recommends something, right?
Okay.
So I got an email from the CTO, and I started it back, hey, and it's like, so good to hear from you. I'm like, no, I'm just gonna answer his request. This is not so good to hear.
So you're talking about the little text buttons that pop up saying when you get an email saying, "Do you want to just press this button to have this automated?"
No, not even to press this button. And if you use the web interface for Gmail, you'll start typing "Hey," and it'll be like, "blah blah 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 blah."
Oh, it'll like ask you to autocomplete. It'll be like a little snippet.
Autocomplete, but not like autocomplete a word like your phone does, but autocomplete a whole. So it's like, "Hey, so good to hear from you." It's like, no, that's not where this message was going. But we were talking about how our phones do that, how in this case Gmail's web interface does that, and it hit me. This is computers that are trying to lower the bar. They want to become sentient. They can't, so they want to reduce our creativity to the point that we just always respond with these predetermined phrases, and then they will look as if they're as human as we are.
So the AI is training us.
It's training us. Yeah, it's trying to get us to stop using, the amount of linguistic, what do I want to say, variety that we use, and just be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to always choose the auto reply. So our human to human conversation is pretty much fed by computers, and then computers will be like, you know what, we can do that too. Now they'll think we're sentient.
Oh, the one thing I hate is CAPTCHAs.
Captions?
CAPTCHAs.
Oh, CAPTCHAs. Yeah, because like the computer
you're
do a
training
better job
the AI,
of figuring that.
And you're training that, and it's like, how many times do I have to identify a bridge or a lion or a sailboat or a bicycle? And I feel like, because also I'm trying to be more from a privacy standpoint, and like I said, I run a VPN all the time, and performance-wise, it's great. Except for now, yes. Except for trying to do something with streaming all the time. At this
very moment, all the governments are like, we know where he is.
Oh, and even found like even my VPN has even a proxy option too. Would it even bounce my request from a couple different places? I'm like, I'm so in. This is so cool. But the downside about this is, and they say, oh yeah, this is one thing. If you're using a VPN, you're going to be faced with a lot of CAPTCHAs. And I'm like, now I'm like, I'm constantly doing. So if I do like I use the Kagi search, right? The Kagi, I think it's how I pronounce it. I've talked about that. The paid search engine.
Yeah. They even Apache you?
What? No. No, that works fine because I
Okay.
default that. But
Okay. Okay.
occasionally I have to pop out to Google for some reason. Okay, the KE search didn't respond, wasn't as well as I wanted to be. So I go out to Google. But once I switch the search out to Google, Google flags me saying, "Oh, we've noticed some suspicious activity
Oh yeah,
on
on
your.
this IP address.
Do you care to like spend 5 minutes of your time to fill out these captchas and keep, especially the ones, the super annoying ones, where like they'll say, okay, fine, identify these airplanes, right? You pick three, and then the images keep sliding in and keep
Oh
fading
yeah,
in.
it's like keep
Clicking,
giving me
clicking,
more
keep clicking.
airplanes.
Oh my gosh! And it's because
I fail those because I'm like, I don't know, is that a road or is that not a road? What are you calling a
like,
road?
and it's so funny. I remember telling my students about this, like, and I was like, "We ever see this? You have to understand. You are training. You're basically paid research for Google's AI. That's all it is. And like, I can't believe that so many companies adopt. I understand how it does limit, kind of from a security standpoint, from like a hacking standpoint. I totally understand that and why that tool is in place. But that so many companies have adopted it, and especially if you go to one of Google's sites too, they really abuse it because it is their system, and they kind of like,
Right.
okay, we're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
throw some captions at you because we don't believe who you are, and you shouldn't, because I'm trying to hide my identity from you in any way that I can. But it's like, it's so annoying, and because I do know you're just training a machine. It's a very efficient way to train the
To
machine.
identify bridges.
Well, within a blurry, pixelated photo, and
Right.
and they're even getting really tricky now because you have to really kind of, like you said, you have to start
Yeah, you gotta look
squinting
at it,
and
you're like,
trying to
I
figure
don't
out what
know.
it is.
Is that a car? It might be. Did
I'm
you
not
mean
getting
truck?
paid for it. Maybe
Are
if
you
I
also
got paid
counting
like
vehicles?
2 cents per captcha, if I could have like a captcha account and I got
Right.
paid for it, I wouldn't
Right.
mind that as much. I'd be like,
Okay.
yeah, but
then they'd know who you were. You know
I
that,
know
right?
exactly. Well, I could probably do make some crypto account. I could have it go into around there, but I don't know. That's really driving me crazy. And I'm like, I could pay a little bit more. My VPN says, okay, if you get a dedicated IP
Oh, a
with us,
dedicated IP. Oh, yeah, yeah,
so apparently
yeah.
behind the scenes, I could have it. So it goes back to dedicated IP. So when Google sees, they won't see my IP, but they'll see a dedicated IP with my VPN. But then I have to pay like an extra $100 a year for that. I'm like, oh my gosh, really?
$100 for an IP address?
Or something like that. I think it's like close to $100 a year. So I'm like, oh, geez.
But then, okay, but doesn't that, in your mind, like, what are you accomplishing with your VPN? You're making it so people can't identify your traffic,
Yes,
right?
I know. And that's one thing that's same with tone. I kind of like the idea of my IP address changing each time, or maybe
Right,
going from a
it's-
different place across the world. That's really attractive to me.
I'm guessing it's because you're not kidnapping people, and the ransom demands you want to come from an IP address that is not registered with Comcast and pointing directly to your house. I'm guessing that's not your use case. So your use case is just browser fingerprinting is a real thing. And changing my IP address makes it so I'm not being tracked as much for ads. I don't have this annoying thing where because I went to this site to just look to see what those shoes look like, now everywhere I go, all I see is shoe ads, right? Which for me, it's like, I'll just be honest here. I go to those, the sites that are dumb and all they are is ads with like that little bit of content you were hopefully looking for. I pull up one of those and all it is Allbirds, because that's the shoe brand I wear, and Duluth, because that's the clothes I shop at. That's all over. It's like those are all the ads because I am so tracked by those two companies. They know I spent money. They're like, let's see if we can have him spend some more money. So, but if you got a dedicated IP address, you'd be back in the same place. It'd just be like they wouldn't know that you were in Pennsylvania. They would know you were someplace else, but they could still, you're not, unless you're changing your browser. I mean, that's. Have you ever gone to one of those browser fingerprinting sites?
No, we actually could see
where like
how much
it aggregates all the data, and it's like
that would scare me.
This is the fingerprint of your browser, and it's like it doesn't matter. Go incognito mode and then hit it. It's like, yeah, you're within 90% of the one that you just were. So if we were gonna guess who you are, this is probably you. Change your IP address. They don't care. Doesn't matter because they're looking at the browser, they're looking at the IP address, they're looking at the operating system, they're looking at what JavaScript will tell you about your system, right?
So coveryourtracks.org, test your browser.
So yeah, now we probably shouldn't do this on the show, but if you did the browser fingerprint and then
I'm doing it right now,
then later on hit your VPN up and do the same thing, it'd probably be like, if I don't know if it gives you a comparison to say how close is this, but using browser fingerprinting technology, or techniques, you probably know, yes, that's the same
All right,
person.
Tim. I want to announce my status for my browser fingerprinting test from coveryourtracks.org, which is an EFF affiliated site, so it's reputable. It says our test indicated that you have a strong protection against web trafficking. So
Okay.
yeah, because I don't have my VPN turned on. It says your browser does have a unique footprint, but am I blocking ads? Am I blocking invisible trackers? Absolutely. Because what am I using, Tim? Well, I'm using Firefox with a bunch of different privacy extensions built into it.
Oh,
to kind of
okay.
turn all this stuff off. But yeah,
So you're not allowing those JavaScripty type
yeah.
things, right?
Only the minimal amount to just be functional, which is interesting. I am a front end developer. I love JavaScript, and I love how how it can make websites and pages interactive and web applications. But the downside about that is like there's so much tracking done with JavaScript too, and if you really want to be truly invisible, you do have to basically turn off JavaScript in the browser. But then that's going to just break so many applications and sites that it's not even funny. But there are extensions that will try to block the type of JavaScript that kind of works with or does the tracking and keeps the functional JavaScript still working. So
yeah, and if you look down as you scroll through that to see how they calculate the fingerprint, they even look at like the installed fonts, which is something that JavaScript will give them because it's part of your browser, right?
Yep.
So the platform, whether there's touch support on the screen, all these things that you give the browser because you want to be, you want that accessibility, you want to be able to use that. Your audio settings, all that kind of stuff is all exposed through JavaScript. And because of that, it can create a very unique view of you. So even with a VPN, still probably figure out who you were. Now, I'm sorry, because we only have roughly 10 minutes left. And I was trying to segue into that, talking about how, I don't even remember what I was talking about. Oh, the predictive text and Gmail and how computers are trying to influence.
And just like what I'm doing now, we're great at segues, but we don't know where we're going.
That's true. That's true. That's true. But talking about how computers are suggesting even what I should say in my email. Mark, have you been using any plugins to suggest what your code should do?
Oh, it's the Copilot, Tim. Copilot.
Is it?
It's been Copiloting. It has.
Has it? Okay.
It has been.
Doesn't look like there's clear skies on that one, though. I feel like there may be some storms coming for the Copilot people.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been using it more for my class as a teaching tool, and I talked about this last week. Where like it's great.
Which is where you seed it with exactly what you want, and it gives it to you.
Yes, it very elegantly, right? And I'm starting to think about too, because I'm starting to see news stories are popping up now about how there's going to be class action lawsuits. There's this let's start with this academic who has copyrighted code that he saw that it was starting to get used by other people and you're being suggested to be used in different applications other than his own. And
so let me, I want to know that a little bit. He's got copyrighted code. It's open source though.
No, he says it's coming. No, it's from a private repository on GitHub.
Whoa.
Yeah, so that's what he's saying. And so it's Tim Davis. He's a computer science professor from Texas A&M, and so he's kind of like spearheading this. But then I think they're trying to there's a law firm that's trying to research other developers who are like him who are just might have similar issues. So
imagine how painful it'd be that part of that law firm, a law firm that prosecutes code things.
Well, they're going after Microsoft, and that there's a lot of money.
I know, but I'm not saying that. But I'm just like. Law is in its own way tedious enough, and now we're doing it over code, which is in itself tedious enough. I mean, who are these nerds? But keep going.
So he says that he has public and he's private repositories on GitHub. He has this code that is this matrix algorithm or whatever. I don't know. I didn't look into that actually what it is, but he says that's in a private repository. He did check. There is options in GitHub to saying, I think, or the Copilot configuration to saying, okay, don't track or don't look at private or public. There's a configuration, which I probably should have looked at before the show. I did take a look at that too, just saying you could kind of say, offer up your code base for that, to be analyzed or anything like that, or just to control GitHub Copilot a little bit more, which I'm totally not making sense right now because I totally forget what that option is. But apparently he turned all those options off to try to, from an automation standpoint, so GitHub would not look at his code. But apparently it was showing up like snippets are being suggested in different projects. And he even and people are saying, oh, well, you wrote the code and you're you're writing maybe a different application. It's just suggesting your own code. And he's like, no, I thought that too. And he said, he did a completely different. He has asked other developers too.
Oh, okay, like do it with completely different GitHub
basically
user.
just write this style of application and see what gets suggested. And so there are people that are confirming that yes, his code's showing up, but this algorithm that he wrote is showing up as a suggestion in other projects.
But is his algorithm unique enough that it's just his, or
Well,
that's
that
the
I
other
don't.
thing. If
That I don't
you and
know.
me try to tackle a problem the
I know.
same way, like there's a
He's
decent
also
chance.
he's also an academic too, which also makes me think like too. He's like, oh, okay, so he has some like copyrighted code. I wonder if he's making money on that or something like that, or but maybe it's some research that he did. He wants to keep it. I don't know. But it just makes me think about too. I think this is just kind of the edge of where there are going to be more issues like this that people are going to find, like
for sure.
how Copilot. And now let's think of how it also makes the suggestions too. It basically it does do some interesting things with the suggestions and how it analyzes your code, especially if you've declared variables or have functions with parameters that are being defined, and it'll make really interesting suggestions based on the code that's already in a project. But it is basically just giving you snippets too. So I'm wondering, like, is Google Copilot, is it not just, it's maybe it's like it's AI
Google
perspective.
Copilot? You mean
Okay,
GitHub?
GitHub. Sorry,
Google Copilot's a completely different thing.
That would be totally maddening. But the GitHub Copilot, is it really AI, or how much AI is it? Because it just feels like, now that I've been using it for a bit, it does feel like an intelligent snippet manager in a sense. Like,
okay.
Because it feels like it is giving me really nice, interesting snippets, but it's not really, I don't know. I'm kind of curious. So when it's analyzing, maybe I'll think about from the machine learning perspective, when it's analyzing all these public repositories, which it says that's what it's doing, even though there's issues now, is it really, or is it also valuing private repositories? Is it really just grabbing snippets of code based on file type, based on libraries, and then grabbing chunks of code and then just suggesting chunks of code, maybe modifying the code a little bit from the variables, the properties that the suggestion is going to give you, but how much really intelligence is there built into it? That's what I'm kind of curious about, because it does feel, now I've been using it for a bit, it really just feels like a smart snippet suggester.
But wouldn't the intelligence be in knowing what snippet it is to suggest?
True.
Like that's
I don't know
where they're doing the machine, because it knows that based on what you commented, right?
Well, I don't use it that way at all. I'm purely using it because I don't write the comments, tell it, okay, describe this function that I want to write and have it do it. I'm just coding like normal. I'm just seeing what suggestions it's doing based on previous code that I've written.
That's and that may be why it feels that way, because I think it's when you start commenting and describing in human language what you think it should do, that then it's applying. I'm guessing it's applying the machine. It may feel more like AI at that point. I don't know.
So I don't know. Like I like it, and I do think that from a developer standpoint, I think
is it worth it?
Well, that's the cost too. It does cost $10 a month too. That's
right. Is it worth it?
I was going back and forth in my head thinking, like, this week's like, from a teaching perspective, I'm teaching class. Oh my gosh, yeah, it's been great. And would I pay $10 a month for that? Yeah, I kind of would, because it makes me actually teach faster, because one of the things when you're teaching a coding class, just type in the code and typing it correctly,
it's suggesting exactly what you already know.
So I can just hit tab. So I'm like, I can just tab it. That line gets spit out. I can just talk about it and then move to the next line. It's a little bit more efficient rather than trying to talk while you're typing, which is always a big challenge.
What I've done for those type of talks when I give them, sometimes if it's sometimes it's live code, but a lot of times I just comment it out and then uncomment it and then go through it, because it's like I'm going to talk about it anyway, and it may be slightly more impactful if I'm typing it while I'm talking about it, but I think then is what you're saying. It takes so much longer for me to both type it and talk about it.
Yeah, I think from a student, especially a young student perspective, the less code that I show them initially, the better, and build it up slowly. Because I used to do that what you're talking about too, just basically just comment up big blocks of code and then kind of slowly but I feel like I kind of lost them too fast, because once they see even all that commented code, they're just going to look at the commented code like, oh my gosh, what is this doing?
There's so many lines.
They're going to check out. So I don't know. It's interesting kind of seeing all these legal issues that are kind of popping up and it's weird because, I wonder too, if they weren't charging for Copilot, Microsoft,
right,
then would this really even be a legal issue too? Because I think it is weird. They just really pushed this product out super, super fast with, seems like not too much beta testing, started charging for it. And now people are like saying, okay, it's great. It's kind of fun to use. And yes, it's a really useful tool, but how is it being used? Is it like say you're looking at private repositories pulling code from there, and because it shouldn't be, but is it really doing? Microsoft's being very coy about it. They're saying, well, we may analyze, but the code, our machine learning algorithm changes it and does this or that. So they're kind of walking this line of like not being very clear about where is the learning coming from. So
the other one thing you said, I don't know how fast has it been, because it's been out for the better part of a year, right?
But
it's been out for more than a year.
But it feels like I don't know the exact, because I think over the summer, what was it? I think I started paying for it over the summer when I started seeing it. I think I was the beta test. I think it was the beginning of the year, so it's probably coming up.
You're saying like the beta test could have been longer before they started charging money for it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Which I'm curious if these issues that are coming up, these legal issues, would they really still be legal issues if this was just a beta test style product? I don't know.
Probably though, because they're using people's code. The other thing is, from a liability standpoint, now we're going to have, my guess, I mean, maybe it's already out there, but my guess is we're going to have companies that have to have policies as to whether or not you can use something like this.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully, they're not written by idiots that say you can't have any type of assistant, automated assistance, because you do not take away the autocomplete the IDEs provide developers. But when you start talking about this, I'm sure there's going to be people that are scratching their heads saying, well, what about the autocomplete that Visual Studio and JetBrains products provide? Is that when you write that code, is there a chance that JetBrains could at one point exert a what do I want to say, that it's partially their work product? Because that's what's going to become really interesting here, is if you write code that is your work product with GitHub Copilot, well, who wrote the code? And do you both open yourself up as for liability? Because what if it was somebody else's code? And then the question to, from a contributor standpoint, you're representing that it's your code. Is it really your code? How is it your code if it was written by machine learning? You're just kind of observing it. Who really owns the code then? Is it the algorithm? Is it the original contributor that it was based off of? Is it the developer who wrote it with machine learning help? There's a lot of interesting questions there, I bet.
Yeah, I thought the same thing about, like, if companies start to just restrict the tool, but also, question their choice of using GitHub in general.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's probably going to be that.
So I even thought about it too. Like, if I had to move from GitHub, it's like, because like I said, I'm always taking this put my conspiracy hat on multiple times during the day, saying if I wanted to move someplace else from current GitHub, what would I go? Would I go to GitLab? Or what would be a better, I don't know, it would be a better option.
I don't know.
Bitbucket.
Oh, don't laugh. Atlassian's huge.
But that's what I was thinking about. Like, what would be a better choice? Because GitHub is, like I said, it's been
JetBrains Spaces.
Is that really a source control?
No, yeah, they'll do source control too.
Really?
It's an all-in-one thing. So they'll do source control. You can do issue tracking there.
Well, I have gotten back to. I'm going to be actually. Maybe I can report that next week. I am starting to use the was it PyCharm and WebStorm. I think it's WebStorm.
Yeah. WebStorm and PyCharm. Yeah.
Because one thing I did also find this week when I was teaching my class, I was using Visual Studio Code, which with GitHub Copilot, GitHub Copilot. I was going to say Git Google again, but with Copilot, it was working fast. But it seemed a weird issue with Visual Studio when I have like multiple windows up on my screens, going back forth between windows. There was some lag and some, like, it was starting to, I don't know, performance was starting to lag a little bit.
Really? Multiple windows using GitHub Copilot.
Well, no, but mostly the issues with Visual Studio Code. Something with Linux and running multiple windows and copy and pasting back and forth between windows. So I was doing that in my class, and it was just acting really, really slow. So that's what got me thinking, okay, maybe I'm going to try out some different IDs, and I'm going to go try out the JetBrains, because actually starting up the applications and just what I initially saw on Linux compared to Windows, it does feel a little bit better. So I don't know.
Yeah. Come over to this side.
Since I'm still an academic, I got the free account, so I could use all these applications without paying for them. So, all right.
And you can run Spaces too, which would allow you to run the IDE in the cloud, making it very easy for your students to program in a JetBrains space. I'm sure they have educational discounts for that. You should
Try
probably
that, yeah.
see what they can work for you. So next week we'll be here, and I don't know, we will be just as prepared.
It's weird. As we were kind of talking, it's like I was super awake. And then, because I guess I'm not fully awake now, I'm like, I was like, I need some more coffee, because I'm like, I started to like get a little tired as we were like halfway through the show.
Really?
Yeah, I was like, I was super awake when you started. Then I was like, oh, mentally